Welcome to the HFY Tales channel. Remember to like and subscribe if you like the story. Enjoy and take care.
The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden haze over the endless expanse of desert sands. Ethan's boots crunched against the gritty surface as he trudged forward, a map in one hand and a leather-bound journal in the other. He'd been chasing legends all his life, but this time the legend was real. The story of the Lamp of Zephyra, a mystical artifact that could grant its finder 3 wishes, had drawn adventurers from across the globe for centuries. None had succeeded in finding it until now. Ethan stopped at the base of a towering dune, wiping the sweat from his brow. His eyes scanned the horizon, but there was nothing but more sand, stretching endlessly in every direction. He glanced at his map, comparing it with the coordinates he had painstakingly researched. "This has to be the place," he muttered to himself. The heat was oppressive, even in the late afternoon. Ethan knelt down, taking a deep breath before digging into the sand with his hands. The legends had been vague about the exact location, but if his calculations were right, the lamp should be buried somewhere near this spot. After what felt like hours of digging, his fingertips brushed against something cold and metallic. His heart skipped a beat as he carefully unearthed a small, ornately designed lamp, its surface etched with intricate patterns that glimmered in the dying light. He held it up, inspecting the worn yet beautiful object. This was it, the Lamp of Zephyra. Without thinking, Ethan gave it a quick polish, trying to get a clearer look at the designs. As he rubbed the lamp, a sudden gust of wind swept through the still desert air, swirling around him. Startled, he stepped back, clutching the lamp tightly as smoke began to pour out of its spout, curling and twisting in impossible shapes. The smoke condensed, forming the outline of a figure, a woman, tall and ethereal, her skin glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. As the last tendrils of smoke faded, she stood before him, her eyes a piercing shade of violet. She was stunningly beautiful, her long, flowing hair shimmering like stardust, her form adorned in silk-like garments that seemed to float around her as though gravity barely touched them. "I am Zephyra, daughter of the winds and guardian of the lamp," she spoke, her voice resonant and melodic, yet carrying a weight of ancient power. "For releasing me from my prison, mortal, I shall grant you 3 wishes, within the bounds of what is allowed." Ethan blinked, still processing what he was seeing. A genie, an actual genie, standing before him. His mouth went dry, and he quickly cleared his throat. "You're real," he managed, feeling a mix of awe and disbelief. Zephyra narrowed her eyes slightly, her expression unreadable. "I am as real as you are human, but do not waste my time with awe. Speak your desires, and I shall fulfill them. But be warned, wishes come with a price." Ethan straightened, gathering his thoughts. This was no ordinary encounter. He had to be careful. Genies were known for their trickery. He'd heard stories of careless people making rash wishes and finding themselves trapped in worse situations than before. But there was something different about Zephyra, an ancient sadness in her eyes, a weariness that piqued his curiosity. "What's the price?" he asked, his voice steady. Zephyra studied him for a moment before speaking. "The price is not in gold or blood, but in consequence. Every wish affects the world around it, rippling outward in ways that even I cannot always predict. Power is a dangerous gift, human. Choose wisely." Ethan nodded slowly. He didn't know what he would wish for just yet, but he wasn't going to rush into anything, not with stakes like these. "Why were you trapped in a lamp?" he asked, taking a step closer, his curiosity getting the better of him. Zephyra's gaze hardened, a flash of something ancient and bitter crossing her face. "I was bound by humans, by those who feared my power. They wished to control what they could not understand. I have been imprisoned for centuries, forced to serve those who find me." Ethan felt a pang of sympathy. To be enslaved for so long, bound to a life of servitude, must have been torture. "That's cruel," he murmured. "No one should be trapped like that." Zephyra's eyes softened, just for a moment, before her cool demeanor returned. "Your pity is unnecessary, mortal. I am bound by the laws of my kind. I will grant you your 3 wishes, and then I will return to my lamp, as I have done countless times before." Ethan frowned. Something about this felt wrong. He wasn't like the others who had come before. He wasn't seeking ultimate power or riches. There was something deeper he sought, something that gnawed at his soul whenever he encountered injustice in the world. He held the lamp tightly, and in that moment, a thought crossed his mind. What if he could change everything for her? What if, with one wish, he could set her free? "I have my first wish," he said quietly, locking eyes with Zafira. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I wish for your freedom." The silence that followed Ethan's wish was palpable. Zafira stared at him, her expression frozen in disbelief. For a moment, the air seemed to still, as if the entire world held its breath, waiting for her reaction. You wish for my freedom?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. There was no mockery in her tone, no bitterness, only a stunned disbelief that echoed centuries of broken hopes and unfulfilled dreams. Ethan nodded, his resolve unwavering. "Yes, you shouldn't be trapped like this. You deserve to live your life on your own terms, not as a slave to someone else's whims." Zafira stepped back, her eyes flickering with a storm of emotions that she had clearly not expected to feel. Her hands, which had been poised with the elegance of a creature bound by ancient magic, trembled slightly as she processed his words. "No one has ever wished for that," she said, her voice hollow, as though she were speaking from a distant memory. Her gaze flickered down to her hands, the faintest of chains shimmering on her wrists, invisible to the naked eye, but ever present to her. Ethan took a step closer, his eyes soft but determined. "Well, now someone has. And I mean it, Zafira. I wish for your freedom. No tricks, no hidden agenda." Zafira's violet eyes locked onto his, searching for any hint of deceit, any trace of the selfish desires she had come to expect from mortals. But all she found was sincerity. For the first time in her centuries of imprisonment, someone had wished for something other than themselves, and it left her speechless. She closed her eyes, her form trembling as the ancient magic that bound her began to stir. The air around them crackled with power, a sudden gust of wind swirling through the desert. The chains on her wrists glowed a bright gold, and then, with a sharp crack, they shattered into 1,000 pieces, disintegrating into the air like dust caught in a breeze. Zafira gasped, her hands free for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The magic that had held her prisoner was gone, and with it, the crushing weight of servitude that had defined her existence. She stumbled slightly, catching herself before falling. Ethan instinctively reached out, steadying her. His touch was gentle, a stark contrast to the cruel grasp of masters past. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Zafira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared down at her hands, turning them over as if trying to comprehend the enormity of what had just happened. She was free, truly free. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice filled with a strange mix of wonder and fear. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide with confusion. "Why would you do this? You could have had anything, power, wealth, immortality, and you chose to waste a wish on me." Ethan shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I don't see it as a waste. Everyone deserves freedom, Zafira. No one should be bound like that." Zafira stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing to make sense of this human who had just upended everything she thought she knew. "You aren't unlike any mortal I have ever met," she finally said, her tone soft, almost vulnerable. Ethan smiled. "I'll take that as a compliment." For the first time in centuries, Zafira felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Her freedom had always been an unattainable dream, and now, standing here in the desert with this human, she didn't know what to do next. She had spent so long bound to the whims of others that the idea of making her own choices was both exhilarating and terrifying. "I'm free," she whispered again, as if saying the words would make them more real. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, you are." Zafira's mind raced. What did freedom even mean after so many years? She had no purpose now, no masters, no obligations. The thought of leaving Ethan behind, of striking out into the world alone, sent a strange pang through her chest. She wasn't ready to be alone. Not yet. Do you have a second wish? She asked, her voice softer now, more uncertain. Ethan's smile faded slightly, and he shook his head. Not right now. I didn't come all the way out here to just make wishes. I wanted to learn, to discover more about the ancient world, about magic. SCiFi raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. You came seeking knowledge. Ethan nodded. There's so much about this world that people have forgotten. Magic, the ancient civilizations, beings like you. They're all part of a history that's been buried for too long. I want to uncover it. SCiFi's eyes softened as she regarded him. This human was truly different. Most sought power or fortune, but not him. He sought understanding, and somehow, that made her want to stay by his side, at least for a little while longer. Then perhaps I can help, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. I have seen much in my time, and there is more I can show you than any mortal book could. Ethan looked at her, surprised. You'd stay with me. SCiFi hesitated, feeling the weight of her newfound freedom pressing on her. She could leave, could go anywhere, do anything. But there was something about this human that made her want to stay. At least for now. For a time, she said finally, her voice soft. I want to see what kind of human would give up his greatest desire for another's freedom. Ethan smiled, his eyes lighting up. I'd be honored to have you with me. SCiFi gave him a measured look, but there was a warmth behind her gaze that hadn't been there before. You have my gratitude, Ethan. But remember, there are still 2 wishes left. Choose wisely when the time comes. With that, SCiFi turned her gaze to the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the sand. For the first time in centuries, she was free to watch it with her own eyes, unbound by chains or the whims of others. And for the first time in her life, SCiFi found herself curious about the world, about Ethan, and about what their future might hold. The desert stretched endlessly before them, with the twilight casting long shadows over the dunes as Ethan and SCiFi made their way toward a rocky outcrop on the horizon. The air was cooling, a welcome relief from the blistering heat of the day, but there was a strange tension in the silence between them. SCiFi walked slightly ahead, her elegant movements graceful even in the uneven terrain, but Ethan could sense the unease radiating from her. I didn't mean to shock you, Ethan said, breaking the quiet. I couldn't stand the thought of you being trapped like that. SCiFi didn't respond immediately. She kept her gaze forward, her expression thoughtful, almost distant. Finally, after a few long moments, she spoke. You didn't shock me, Ethan. You surprised me. She glanced back at him, her eyes shimmering in the fading light. I have been bound to that lamp for so long, I never imagined anyone would wish for my freedom. Ethan caught up with her, walking beside her now. Why not? It just seemed like the right thing to do. SCiFi sighed softly, and for the first time, Ethan saw a flicker of vulnerability in her usually poised demeanor. Humans, they are creatures of desire. I have granted wishes for power, wealth, revenge, every possible form of selfishness. In all my years, no one ever thought to free me. No one saw me as more than a tool to be used. Ethan frowned, his gaze softening. That's terrible. I can't imagine what that must have been like for you. SCiFi didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was low, almost bitter. It was lonely. I have lived for millennia, and yet I have spent most of it in isolation, serving masters who cared nothing for me. I was a prisoner in every sense of the word. They walked in silence for a few more minutes, the weight of her words settling between them like a heavy fog. Ethan wanted to say something comforting, but he wasn't sure what would help. Instead, he offered the only thing he could. You're free now. You don't have to be alone anymore. SCiFi stopped walking, turning to face him fully, her violet eyes locked onto his, searching for something in his gaze. Do you truly believe that freedom will change everything? Ethan hesitated, not sure how to respond. He hadn't really thought about what freedom would mean for her. He had only wanted to do the right thing. I don't know, he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. But I do know that being free means you get to decide what happens next. It's your life now, SCiFi. No one else's. SCiFi looked away, her gaze distant again. Freedom, it's not as simple as you think. I have been bound for so long that I don't even know what to do with myself now. What does it mean to be free when I have no purpose, no direction? Ethan was quiet for a moment, understanding the weight of her question. Freedom for her wasn't just the absence of chains. It was an entirely new reality, one she hadn't been prepared for. Well, he said gently, maybe you don't have to figure it all out at once. Maybe you just take it one step at a time. And if you want, I can help. Zafira's gaze softened as she looked at him, her usual guarded expression fading. There was a vulnerability there, a hesitance she hadn't shown before. You would do that? Help me find my way? Ethan smiled warmly. Of course. You don't have to do this alone. For the first time since her release, Zafira smiled. It was a small, delicate smile, but it was genuine. You are a strange human, Ethan, she said softly. I have seen many, but none like you. Ethan chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. They continued walking, but the tension had eased. Zafira seemed more relaxed, her steps lighter, though the uncertainty of her future still weighed on her. As they neared the rocky outcrop, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in shades of deep purple and orange. Zafira paused at the base of the rocks, her expression thoughtful again. There is something you should know, Ethan, about my kind. Ethan raised an eyebrow, sensing the seriousness in her tone. What is it? Zafira turned to face him, her eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. Genies are not just magical beings. We are tied to the very fabric of the world's magic. Our existence, our power, is woven into the ancient spells that created us. That is why I was bound, because our power is dangerous, even to us. Ethan listened carefully, his curiosity piqued. Dangerous how? Zafira's gaze darkened. When we grant wishes, we alter the natural order of things. The magic that flows through us is ancient, primal. It can cause unintended consequences, disrupt the balance of the world. That is why we were bound, to prevent chaos. Ethan frowned, the gravity of her words sinking in. So, every wish has a price. Zafira nodded. Yes, and even though I am no longer bound, that truth remains. The magic I wield is still dangerous. Every wish you make will have repercussions, whether you intend them or not. Ethan's mind raced as he processed what she was saying. He had been so focused on the idea of granting her freedom that he hadn't considered the larger implications of the wishes. I had no idea it was that serious. Zafira smiled sadly. Most mortals don't. They only see the power, not the cost. But you're different. You think beyond your own desires. That's why I wanted to warn you. Ethan nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. I'll be careful with the other two wishes. Zafira looked at him, her expression softening again. You are kind, Ethan. More than I expected. But even kindness has its limits in the face of magic like mine. They stood there for a moment, the desert quiet around them. The stars began to twinkle in the sky, and the cool night breeze swept across the sands. Zafira turned her gaze upward, taking in the night sky with a sense of awe. It's been so long since I've seen the stars like this. Ethan followed her gaze, feeling a strange sense of peace. They're beautiful, aren't they? Zafira nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, they remind me of what I've lost, and what I might gain. Ethan glanced at her, a small smile playing on his lips. Well, maybe you'll gain more than you think. Zafira met his eyes, her expression soft but unreadable. Perhaps. As the night deepened, they sat together in silence, watching the stars. The weight of Zafira's freedom hung in the air between them, but it wasn't a burden anymore. It was a new beginning, one they would face together, one step at a time. The following days were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. Wandering through ancient ruins, uncovering forgotten magical artifacts, and learning about the world's deeper mysteries had always been his dream. But now he had an unexpected companion. Zafira, free from the confines of her lamp, walked beside him, guiding him through places she had seen centuries before, offering knowledge no mortal had ever possessed. At first, The days were filled with a cautious formality. Zafira, though free, still carried the weight of her centuries-long imprisonment, and Ethan, while eager to learn, was careful not to overstep any boundaries. But as time passed, something began to shift. The initial distance between them grew smaller as they shared stories, thoughts, and experiences. A bond started to form, delicate but undeniable. One evening, after a long day of exploring a ruined temple, they sat beside a crackling fire, the cool desert air wrapping around them. Ethan leaned back, gazing up at the night sky, the stars glittering like diamonds against the velvet darkness. Zafira sat across from him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the flames. "You've been quiet today," Ethan said, breaking the silence. He had noticed her distant demeanor, the way she seemed lost in thought as they explored the ruins. Zafira looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment before she sighed softly. "It's strange, being free after so long. I'm not sure what to do with myself." Ethan sat up, leaning forward slightly. "You don't have to have it all figured out right away, you know. No one expects that." Zafira's eyes softened as she met his gaze. "It's not just that, Ethan. It's everything. The world is different from how I remember it. Magic has faded, civilizations have risen and fallen. I've spent centuries watching time pass from inside that lamp, and now I'm in a world that feels both familiar and foreign." Ethan nodded, understanding the enormity of what she was feeling. "It must be overwhelming, but you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here." Zafira gave him a small smile, a rare expression of vulnerability crossing her face. "You are kind, Ethan. More so than I expected. Most mortals would have used their wishes for selfish gains by now." Ethan shrugged. "I'm not like most people, I guess." She laughed softly, a sound that was surprisingly warm, given her usual stoic demeanor. "That much is clear." They sat in silence for a while, the crackle of the fire filling the quiet night. There was a comfort in the silence now, a peacefulness that hadn't been there in the beginning. It was as though they had moved past the initial strangeness of their situation and found an easy rhythm with each other. Ethan glanced at Zafira, watching the way the firelight danced across her features. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal, like something out of a legend. But there was more to her than her beauty. There was a strength, a resilience that fascinated him. "I've been meaning to ask," Ethan said, breaking the quiet. "Why did you decide to stay with me? You're free now. You could go anywhere, do anything." Zafira's gaze flickered to him, her expression thoughtful. "I suppose I could," she admitted. "But there's something about you, Ethan. Something different. I've spent centuries serving selfish, cruel masters. You're the first human I've met who thinks of others before himself. That's rare, even among my kind." Ethan chuckled, feeling a slight warmth creep into his cheeks. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." Zafira's eyes softened. "And that's exactly why I stayed. I wanted to see what kind of person you are. What drives you to make the choices you do?" Ethan leaned back again, his gaze shifting to the stars. "I don't know if I'm that interesting," he said with a laugh. "I've always been curious about the world, about magic, about the things most people forget. I want to understand it all, not for power or glory, but because there's so much out there that we don't know. I guess I just want to learn as much as I can." Zafira tilted her head, studying him. Knowledge is a rare motivation. Most people seek it for power or control. Ethan shrugged. "I've never cared about power. I just want to understand the world." There was a silence between them again, but this time it was comfortable. The kind of silence that comes when two people understand each other without the need for words. Zafira's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she looked away, her expression softening. "You know," she began, her voice quieter now, "I've seen a lot of the world in my time, more than most mortals ever will. But I've never met anyone quite like you, Ethan." Ethan smiled, turning to face her. "I'll take that as a compliment." Zafira's lips curled into a small smile. It was meant to be. As the night wore on, they continued talking, sharing stories from their pasts, their hopes, and their fears. Zafira spoke of the ancient civilization she had once known, of the powerful magic that once flowed through the world. She told Ethan of the wars between genies and humans, of the betrayal that had led to her imprisonment, and the long, lonely centuries she had spent trapped in the lamp. Ethan listened intently, absorbing every word. There was a deep sadness in Zephyra's voice as she spoke of her past, but there was also a strength that had carried her through it all. She had been through so much, and yet she had come out the other side with her dignity and resilience intact. As the fire began to die down, Zephyra turned to Ethan, her gaze thoughtful. "Do you ever regret it? Wishing for my freedom?" Ethan shook his head. "Not for a second. I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Zephyra's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability shining through. "Thank you, Ethan. You've given me something I never thought I'd have again." Ethan smiled. "I'm glad I could help." There was a long pause, and then Zephyra's gaze dropped to the ground, her expression conflicted. "There's something else I've been meaning to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's brow furrowed. "What is it?" Zephyra hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been bound for so long. I never thought I'd feel anything for anyone again. But there's something about you that's different. Something that makes me want to stay, even though I'm free to go." Ethan's heart skipped a beat, his gaze locking onto hers. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, a quiet admission that took him by surprise. Ethan began, but his words faltered as he struggled to process what she was saying. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to feel anything for Zephyra beyond admiration and friendship, but now, standing here in the quiet of the desert night, he couldn't deny the growing bond between them. Zephyra looked away, her cheeks tinged with the faintest hint of color. "I understand if you don't feel the same. It's just, I needed to tell you." Ethan took a deep breath, stepping closer to her. "Zephyra." Before he could finish, a gust of wind swept through the desert, extinguishing the fire and sending a chill down his spine. Zephyra stiffened, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, immediately on edge. Zephyra's voice was low, tense. "We're not alone." The gust of wind cut through the desert like a cold warning, and Ethan felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He glanced around, but there was nothing out there but the vast emptiness of the sands. Yet the way Zephyra had tensed, the way her eyes narrowed in suspicion, told him there was someone approaching. "Who is it?" Ethan whispered, trying to keep his voice steady. He moved closer to Zephyra, instinctively wanting to protect her, though he knew she had far more power than he did. Zephyra's eyes glowed faintly as she scanned the horizon, her senses tuned to the magical undercurrents that mortals couldn't perceive. "An old enemy," she said, her voice low and controlled. "Someone I thought I'd left behind when I gained my freedom." Ethan's stomach churned. "What do we do?" Zephyra's gaze snapped to him, her expression serious. "Stay close to me. Whatever happens, don't make any rash decisions." Before Ethan could ask what she meant, the air around them grew thick with magic. A dark shimmer appeared on the horizon, and within moments, a figure materialized, a tall, imposing figure cloaked in shadow. The magic emanating from him was palpable, sending waves of power rippling through the desert. Ethan felt the weight of it pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The figure stepped forward, and as he did, the shadows around him dissipated, revealing a man, or at least, something that resembled one. His features were sharp, almost too perfect, his eyes glowing with an eerie red light. He wore dark robes that flowed around him as if caught in an unseen wind, and his presence seemed to suck the warmth out of the air. Zephyra's voice was cold when she spoke. "Azrit," the man, Azrit, smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "Zephyra, it's been too long." Ethan could feel the tension between them, thick and heavy like the desert air before a storm. He stepped forward, instinctively placing himself between Zephyra and Azrit, though he knew it was a futile gesture. "What do you want?" Zephyra asked, her voice steady, but Ethan could sense the underlying tension. Azrit's smile widened, his eyes flicking briefly to Ethan before settling back on Zephyra. "Oh, I think you know what I want, Zephyra. I've come to reclaim what is mine." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Reclaim. She's free. Azrid's gaze snapped to him, and Ethan felt the weight of his power bearing down on him like a crushing force. Free, Azrid said, his voice dripping with amusement. She may be free of her lamp, mortal, but she is not free of her destiny. Zephyra stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. I am no longer bound to you, Azrid. My freedom is my own, and I will not be your servant again. Azrid chuckled, a low, menacing sound. Oh, Zephyra, you misunderstand. You were never meant to be just a servant. You were meant to rule by my side. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he looked between Zephyra and Azrid. What's he talking about? Zephyra didn't take her eyes off Azrid. He's lying. I was never meant to rule with him. Azrid wants to conquer the realms, both the mortal and the magical. He tried to use me to gain power centuries ago, and when I refused, he trapped me in the lamp. Azrid's smile faded, his expression hardening. You had your chance to rule, Zephyra, and you threw it away. But now, with your freedom restored, we can fulfill the destiny we were meant for. Ethan clenched his fists. She doesn't want that. She's free to choose, and she's choosing to live her own life. Azrid's eyes flicked to Ethan, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something like interest in his gaze. Ah, the mortal who wished for her freedom. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. You could have had anything, and you chose to free her. How noble. Ethan stood his ground, though his heart was racing. She deserved her freedom. No one should be trapped like that. Azrid raised an eyebrow, his smile returning. Such a waste, he mused. But it seems you still have 2 wishes left, don't you? Ethan froze, realizing what Azrid was getting at. He hadn't even thought about the remaining wishes. Not until now. Azrid's voice was smooth, almost seductive. Think of what you could have, mortal. Power beyond your wildest dreams. Riches, immortality, control over the forces of magic itself. With just 1 wish, you could become a god among men. Ethan's throat tightened. The temptation was real, and Azrid's words echoed the deepest, most hidden desires of every human. Power, control, the ability to reshape the world as one saw fit. He had never wanted those things, but now, with the possibility dangling in front of him, he felt the weight of it pressing down on him. Don't listen to him, Zephyra said, her voice sharp. He's trying to manipulate you. Azrid ignored her, his gaze still locked on Ethan. You could have anything, Ethan. Anything. The power to protect those you care about. The strength to shape the world for the better. Don't you want that? Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He did want to help people, to make the world better. But not like this. Not by bending the rules of magic, by disrupting the balance of everything. That wasn't the kind of person he wanted to be. He looked at Zephyra, who was watching him with an intensity that sent a wave of clarity through his mind. She had warned him about the price of wishes, the unintended consequences. And now, here he was, being tempted by the very thing she had cautioned him about. No, Ethan said, his voice steady. I don't want power or control. I'm not making any wish like that. Azrid's expression darkened, the amusement fading from his eyes. You're a fool, mortal. You could have had the world. And you would have destroyed it. Ethan shot back. I won't be part of that. Zephyra stepped forward, placing herself firmly between Ethan and Azrid. You've lost, Azrid. Ethan isn't like the others. He won't fall for your tricks. Azrid's eyes flared with anger, his aura growing darker. This isn't over, Zephyra. You belong to me, and I will claim you, whether you want it or not. With that, Azrid disappeared in a swirl of dark magic, leaving behind an oppressive silence. The weight of his presence lingered in the air, but the danger had passed for now. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, his heart still racing. That was intense. Zephyra turned to him, her expression softening. You did well. Many would have been tempted by his offer. Ethan shrugged, trying to play it off. It wasn't easy, I'll admit, but I'm not about to make the same mistakes others have. Zephyra smiled, a genuine warmth in her eyes. You are truly one of a kind, Ethan. He felt a blush creep up his neck, but tried to ignore it. So what now? Azrid won't just give up, will he? Zafira's expression darkened. No, he won't. He'll be back. And he'll be more dangerous than ever. But we'll face him together. Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. Together. The next few days passed in a tense silence, both Ethan and Zafira constantly aware of the looming threat that Azrid represented. They continued their journey, delving deeper into forgotten ruins and uncharted territories. But the shadow of Azrid's return lingered over them. Every night, as they camped under the stars, Ethan found himself looking over his shoulder, half expecting Azrid to materialize out of the darkness. Zafira, for her part, was equally unsettled. Her usual poise and grace had taken on an edge of wariness, and she was quieter than usual, lost in her own thoughts. Ethan knew she was worried. Worried about what Azrid might do. Worried about what his return meant for her hard-won freedom. One evening, after another long day of traveling through the desert, Ethan finally broke the silence. They had stopped to rest beside a crumbling, ancient wall, the remnants of a long-forgotten civilization. The setting sun cast long shadows across the sand, and the air was cool with the promise of nightfall. "Zafira," Ethan began, his voice soft but firm. "You've been distant lately. I know you're worried about Azrid, but we can't just keep pretending everything's fine. If there's something more I need to know, now's the time to tell me." Zafira didn't respond at first. She stared into the distance, her gaze distant, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she turned to him, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the fading light. "There's something I haven't told you," she admitted, her voice quiet but heavy with the weight of her confession. Ethan's stomach dropped. He had suspected there was more to the story, but hearing her say it out loud made his heart race with anxiety. "What is it?" Zafira hesitated, her eyes flicking away from his as though she were searching for the right words. "Azrid and we were bound by more than just magic. We were once part of a greater plan, a plan to rule over both the mortal and magical realms. Long before I was imprisoned, we were supposed to be partners." Ethan's mind reeled. "Partners? You mean you were going to rule together?" Zafira nodded slowly, her gaze downcast. "Yes, that was his goal, at least. I was young, and I didn't fully understand the consequences of what he was asking. He saw power as the ultimate goal, but I saw the destruction it would cause. When I refused to join him, he trapped me in the lamp, hoping to force me into submission." Ethan stared at her, trying to wrap his mind around what she was saying. "So, you were supposed to rule the realms with him?" Zafira nodded again, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was his plan, but I never wanted that kind of power. I wanted to protect the balance between the realms, not destroy it." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Does that mean he's still trying to bring that plan to life, even now? Zafira's gaze darkened, and she nodded. "Yes, Azrid will stop at nothing to gain control of both realms, and now that I'm free, he thinks he can use me to achieve his goal. That's why he came after us." Ethan clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. Azrid's obsession with power wasn't just about Zafira. It was about domination, about reshaping the world in his image. And Zafira was caught in the middle of it, simply because of who she was. "We can't let him do that," Ethan said, his voice firm. "He can't force you into anything." Zafira's eyes softened as she looked at him. "It's not that simple, Ethan. Azrid isn't just powerful, he's dangerous. And now that I'm free, he will stop at nothing to claim me as his partner, whether I want it or not." Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness, his resolve hardening. "I won't let him take you, Zafira. We'll find a way to stop him." Zafira gave him a small, sad smile. "I appreciate your determination, but Azrid isn't like anything you've faced before. He wields magic that is beyond anything a mortal can comprehend. Even with the 2 wishes you have left, it may not be enough." Ethan's mind raced. He still had 2 wishes, and Zafira had warned him about the dangers of using them without considering the consequences. But now, with Azrid threatening everything they had fought for, the temptation to use those wishes, to wield the power they offered, was growing stronger. "I could wish for the power to protect you," Ethan said, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. I could make sure Azrid never touches you again." Zephyra's eyes widened, and she stepped toward him, her expression urgent. "No, Ethan, you can't make that wish. Power like that comes with a price. One you may not be willing to pay." Ethan frowned. "But if it's the only way to stop him—" "It's not," Zephyra interrupted, her voice firm. "You've seen what Azrid is capable of. Power corrupts, Ethan. Even if you wish for it with the best of intentions, it could change you. I don't want to see that happen." Ethan stared at her, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He wanted to protect her, to keep her safe from Azrid's reach. But she was right. Using a wish for that kind of power could have unforeseen consequences. And Zephyra's fear, the way her voice trembled when she spoke of it, only confirmed that. "What do we do then?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Zephyra's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "We face him together, you and me. We don't need magic to defeat him. We need trust, and we need each other." Ethan felt a sense of calm wash over him at her words. Zephyra's strength, her resolve, was unwavering, even in the face of the threat Azrid posed. And somehow, that gave him the strength he needed to push forward. "Together," he repeated, his voice firm with conviction. Zephyra smiled, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Yes, together." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in deep shades of purple and gold, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. They had come this far, and now, with the threat of Azrid looming over them, they would have to face him head-on. But with Zephyra by his side, he knew they could find a way to defeat him, without falling into the traps of magic and power. And as they prepared for the battle ahead, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their bond, the connection that had grown between them, was the key to defeating Azrid. Together, they would face the darkness, and together, they would find a way to overcome